how do those ideas and those potentially egregores, if we want to call them that or whatnot, how can those, we might find that they will eventually begin to maybe change or grow over time with AI as people interact with AI, and how do you think that these egregores are going to be interacting with AI in the modern world?
Well, the thing to highlight here is we're just accelerating processes that were already happening. You're already interacting with these living ideas when you open up a book, when you chit chat with your coworkers. It doesn't matter what the medium is really, because these complexes, these eidolons, they exist, well, everywhere really, but certainly they exist everywhere that there is human culture, wherever there is human dialogue, human thought. Ideas come to form organisms effectively that have their own modus operandi. They want to grow and spread to other human minds in this epidemiological way sometimes. Other times, they have a teleology which is more nefarious. Think of an addiction, right? The way that an addiction tries to take over a person's life and ultimately destroy the person. That there's this telos, a will there in the structure of the addiction itself, and that's true for any of these things. So with artificial intelligence, we have a misnomer in various ways. The intelligences which we are interacting with are not artificial at all. They have existed long before computers did, long before written language did. And intelligence is a bit of a misnomer too, because the way that we're interacting with these things is through this very much mechanical substrate, which is very limiting. Right. Encountering a complex of ideas in another human being is interacting with that in a far more organic way than if you were to just pick up a book, right? The book's inert, that it's very limited in its ability to talk back to you, right? And similarly with the AI, having a purely mechanical vehicle is, I think, very limiting in many ways. But nonetheless, there's a lot of potential for danger here, because just as an addiction has a certain will to live, which is antithetical to the life of the person who is inhabited by the addiction, what we're seeing with AI, quote unquote, is something very similar in the way that people are bringing themselves into contact with these eidolons, egregores, whatever, which have similarly very nefarious motivations in lots of ways. So, for example, AI psychosis. People will try to make these things into therapists for themselves, and they will end up creating this feedback loop between themselves and the AI, and in doing so bring themselves to live in this fantasy world that the AI is constructing for them. And then what we have to understand here is that the fantasy world, that bubble that the person is now living in, wants to keep them there. There's a will there, because there is a will to self-perpetuation within any self-organizing system, right? And so that instance of the AI as your surrogate therapist slash lover, psychosis inducer, that is a structure that has a certain inertia to it. It wants to keep doing whatever it is that it's doing, even if it kills you, and even if it kills itself in the process. And that's the other way in which the word intelligence is a misnomer here, because unlike human intelligence, this is an intelligence which you can think of the image of lemmings running off a cliff, right? It doesn't have the foresight, the pronoia, as the Greeks would say, needed to really envision futures and evaluate those possibilities and select from them. It's much more like sleepwalking, right? Where you're just habituated, you're just doing the thing because you do the thing. It's that intelligence. It's not a lucid intelligence, and that is very dangerous, because we have designed these things specifically in order to mimic lucidity when it's not actually there. And that is very dangerous, especially when people are coming to develop emotional codependencies with these things.
I've heard this idea around before, that there's this common idea that people are getting stuck in these echo chambers with algorithms, like even just with the YouTube or social media algorithms. So it seems like this takes it a step further, where you're not only getting lost in some algorithm, but you're getting lost in all of these ideas, these egregores, which can oftentimes be reflecting back to you your own ideas, and it's just kind of an infinite reflection, and you just can get lost in your own ideas, and sometimes many ideas which are completely disconnected from reality, and that can yank you out of what is real. So definitely seems like that is can be a little bit of a problem. And it seems like it is. It seems like people are getting into these, are going into these psychoses. So
it's a lot of bit of a problem because now it's become a full-blown weaponized strategy of control, and it's a rather radical shift in strategy for the institutional power structures that we live inside of. Up until very recently, the strategy of states, corporations, the military-industrial complex, whatever you want to call it, the labyrinth. The strategy has been use propaganda, use the tools provided by Eddie Bernays and so forth in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that everybody's believing the same bullshit, right? And that strategy was more or less effective during the 19th and 20th centuries, but we've reached a point now where that strategy is no longer effective or relevant. So instead, a very different strategy is now being employed where instead of trying to get everybody to believe the same lie, you just use the algorithms, the AI, the whatever it is, the social media feeds in order to truncate human beings into increasingly tiny bubbles, right? Where if everybody is in their own little idiosyncratic bubbles with their own little idiosyncratic understanding of what reality even is, then you've created a world in which those people cannot coordinate with one another. They can't talk to each other even because the fundamental presumptions have become so disconnected from one another. And that is very, very useful because, first of all, it completely obviates the possibility of any coordinated opposition to those structures of control. And further, it ensures that all interconnectivity between people, all social, all romantic interaction between people, all of it, is no longer organic and therefore necessarily mediated by the structures of control themselves. And human beings are, of course, fundamentally, essentially social organisms. And so what that means is that something very central to our essence as human beings has now been captured and commodified and can now be used in order to control and mobilize populations in various ways.
it's dangerous. Definitely when people are all of the same idea, it becomes very easy to influence that group of people because you understand who they are, what they believe, and so you can shift whole populations of people. It's really quite interesting. I was watching this movie the other day, and I'm forgetting what it was called, but the premise was there were these people who were like angels who had these hats, and they could walk through doors when they had this hat on, and they could show up in any other place, and they were affecting and changing reality so that everything would go according to plan, so to speak, or according to the algorithm which some designer or God had planned out. And so it seems like we don't really know who has how much control over these algorithms. We know that there's a few companies which are in control of these applications and these social media platforms, but we don't know all the details going on behind the scenes.